Hello, I'm Maureen Kelly, and I serve as the Director of Development at Christ the King Jesuit College Prep. I'm happy to welcome you to our sixth annual Spring Luncheon. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. In today's program, we will hear from CTK President Clem Martin, watch a video from CTK alumna Jada Buckley, and enjoy a conversation between our guest speakers, Dr. Khalilah Gates, a pulmonologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and Farran, a senior in CTK's class of 2021. I'd like to thank the sponsors for today's event for their generous support of Christ the King students. Thank you to McShane Companies, Wintrust Bank, and Our Peace Plan. And I'd like to wish Sister Mary Fran McLaughlin a very happy birthday from all of us at CTK. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Clem Martin, President of Christ the King Jesuit College Prep. Clem will give us a brief update on life today at CTK.
Thanks, Maureen. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Echoing Maureen, I'd like to begin by thanking our many generous sponsors for your support of this event today and all you do to lift up our students and the community here at Christ the King. Although grateful that we are still able to gather with you today, I pray that next year we'll be sitting down and sharing a meal together in person for next year's Spring Luncheon. For those of you new to our mission at Christ the King Jesuit College Prep, we are a Catholic school in the Jesuit tradition located in the Austin community on Chicago's West Side. We are also a member of the Cristo Rey network of schools that offer a unique curriculum that includes an innovative corporate work study program. Through this program, students work at companies across the Chicagoland region where they gain valuable work experience and pre-professional training while earning a significant portion of their tuition. Our corporate work study program is a foundational piece of the education we provide to the students at Christ the King, and is one of the things that initially attracts many students and their families to our school. As you probably surmised, this program was difficult to operate this past year, as many of our corporate partners shuttered their offices and moved to working remotely. We are very appreciative of the many companies that provided remote work experiences for our students and those that have maintained their financial support. Thank you all very much. Educationally, the experience for our students has taken on many forms this past year. In person initially for orientation and some training, remote learning for much of the fall semester, before returning to in-person instruction in a hybrid model during the second semester. In making these difficult decisions about how best to educate our students, we spoke to our parents. It was in these conversations that we learned more about the true impact of COVID on our community. The impact was far greater than just the educational cost. Loss of family members to the virus, reduced hours at work, lost jobs, food and housing insecurity, and much more. These and other issues have added stress and have made this an extremely difficult year emotionally, financially, and for the physical and mental health for many of our families. You may have seen or read about the impact COVID has had on the African American community here in Chicago, but we thought that a conversation with Dr. Khalilah Gates, a CTK board member and a critical care pulmonary specialist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, would help people better understand some of the challenges our students and their families have faced throughout the pandemic. Thank you, Dr. Gates, for your willingness to share your experiences with us today. Before we introduce our speakers, I'd like to share a video message from CTK alumna from the class of 2017, Jada Buckley. Jada is a junior at the University of Akron, where she is currently studying social work and found herself leading and serving during the pandemic. We are very proud of Jada. She is a woman for and with others and a great representative of our CTK community. Thank you for making this video for us, Jada. And thank everybody for joining us today for our annual Spring Luncheon. God bless.
Hi, my name is Jada Buckley, and I am a Christ the King class of 2017 graduate. I am now a student at the University of Akron in Akron, Ohio. I am the first in my family to go to college, and I am the first CTK grad to go to the University of Akron. While I am a full-time student at school, I am also a semi-full-time employee at Cleveland Clinic Akron General Hospital as a senior tech. My job as a senior tech is to help the patients do their daily activities, such as help them get up to go to the bathroom if they need help, and help them clean themselves, help them feed themselves, or relay information to the nurses if the nurses are not available at that moment. I started working as a senior tech in December of 2019 for 3 days a week just to gain the experience that I wanted to have in the medical field and to also earn some extra money, of course. After a few months on the job and getting the hang of my job as a senior tech, COVID decided to hit and patients arrived and numbers increased quickly. We didn't have enough staff or PPE to handle the influx in patients at the very beginning. I was quickly thrust into a larger role during this pandemic, and I would also pick up shifts left and right to help other coworkers who had families and children who could not go to school to help them be able to stay home with their kids because they needed to. It was hard seeing people being sick and dying, and for the most part, not being able to be with their families in the end of it. I saw firsthand how hospital social workers played a huge role in people's lives, helping patients and their families get the resources and care and financial support that they needed to recover from this drastic thing that happened to them. The stress of COVID affected everyone, me included. I ended up having to take a 2 week leave away from work and just go home because I needed my family to loves and support to keep me going and get my mind back where it needed to be. Just spending time with them helped me in way bigger ways than one. My mom helped me figure out different ways to deal with stress and anxiety while working on the COVID floor is by listening to motivational music, exercising, and doing breathing exercising as well. Upon my return from my break, things were better at the hospital with more staffing and supplies. And going through this whole pandemic and learning everything and seeing the major roles that social workers played, it made me want to switch my major from nursing to social work. And I am enjoying the classes so far that I'm taking. I am on track to graduate in 2022. I still have a career in helping people in need in the nursing field, but right now, social work is definitely where I want to start. Thank you for listening to my story, and you guys have a great event.
I hope you enjoyed hearing Jada tell about her experience. Jada is one of 525 CTK alumni out making a difference in the world. It is my pleasure to introduce you to today's special guests. Dr. Khalilah Gates is a pulmonary specialist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital and serves on the board of directors at Christ the King. Joining Dr. Gates is Farran, a senior at Christ the King. In her corporate work study job, Farran worked at Community Investment Corporation. She has been accepted to 8 four-year colleges, which I'm sure she'll be happy to tell you about. Farran, Dr. Gates, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Hi, my name is Farran Moore, and I'm a senior here at Christ the King, class of 2021. And I'm excited to spend some time talking to Dr. Gates-Hill. And to start off our conversation, I'd like to get some need to know questions, fun questions out of the way. So, if you could rename yourself, what would it be and why?
Well, thank you, Farron. I would not rename myself. I love my name. It's Arabic. It means the love of God, and it's a name my parents gave me. So there's no other name better for me than Khalilah.
I totally agree. I'm glad you love your name. Um, so what sport do you find the most boring?
So I'm probably going to get lots of emails after this, but it would have to be baseball. It's long and not a lot of activity. So I think I'm going to go with baseball and take whatever comes with it. But on that note, Farron, with you, would you rename yourself? And what's your favorite sport?
I would not rename myself. I find my name to be very unique. Out of my whole 18 years of living, I only met one person with the same name, so everything is customized for me.
Absolutely.
And my favorite sport I say would be dancing, even though it's not really considered a sport, but I'll say dance.
It's aerobic activity, so it works too.
Okay. Um, so Okay, so now that we have the fun questions out the way, I feel that we are ready to move on to why we are here today. So, you serve on the board of directors at Christ the King. And what brought you to our school? And what about our school's mission resonated with you?
Absolutely. So I've been involved with CTK almost from the beginning. I am friends with some of the founding board members, Sister Brenda Egan and Dr. Anthony Barbado. I attended a Jesuit medical school, Loyola, and so that's where I met both of them. I loved my Jesuit education in learning to serve, and particularly serve my patients. And that spirit of the Jesuit education of serving and learning carries over to CTK. I'm from the West Side and believe in giving back to my community. So all of those factors contribute to my sitting on the board and continued interactions with CTK.
Okay, thank you.
So Farran, I told you why I am involved in CTK. Why did you choose to come to CTK?
Honestly, I chose CTK because of the uniform, so I wouldn't have to go washing. Well, I still have to go washing, but I wouldn't have to wash as many clothes. Also, it's a majority Black school, so and also it was not far from home. It's very convenient, and the famous corporate work study program it really led me to Christ the King. Paying part of my tuition, taking some responsibility away from my mother and putting the independence on me. So that's why I chose Christ the King.
That's
I
awesome.
remember in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of fear out there. In March of 2020, we heard as a society, we didn't know what we were up against. At CTK, we were sent home for what we thought would be 2 weeks. So we heard reports of lack of hospital beds, ventilators, and some confusion on masks and how the virus has spread. But when did the COVID-19 start impacting your work significantly?
Okay. So it's interesting. Like many people, we didn't really understand the impact that COVID-19 would have on us. I remember like paying attention to it in December and paying attention to what was happening in China and thinking like maybe this is just like the flu. Maybe there's not a lot to worry about. Um, and then in March, the weird thing is that we had patients kind of with febrile illnesses between maybe November, December, and March when it was declared a pandemic. And we didn't like the way we dealt with them was very different than now. Like they were just probably the flu. And in retrospect, that's quite interesting to me. And so in March, you're watching the numbers rise. There's a declaration of a pandemic. And what does this mean? As a pulmonary critical care doctor, I'm on the front line. Like I am going to take care of all those patients that come into the ICU. And so you start to kind of try to figure out how this is going to impact you professionally as well as personally. And you just really can't figure it out. You have to live it. And so there were a lot of planning. And I remember there's certain aspects of it that stick out in my mind. I remember receiving an email from my boss saying, you know what, we're not going to come in to work anymore. Don't come on campus unless you absolutely have to. And that was the first attempt to preserve the workforce. That's insane. Like, don't come to work unless I have to, because we couldn't afford for the ICU docs to all go down. And we didn't know, we heard the stories of inappropriate PPE and we were all trying to figure it out. And so that's when it really started to become real. And we realized that we were going to be impacted by this. So lots of scheduling, lots of very difficult conversations that we were having to have about, what happens if we run out of beds? How do we avoid running out of beds? What happens if we don't have ventilators? Where can we get it? This idea of reusing masks. Like we've never done that before. You put it on, you take it off, you throw it in the trash. Now you are handed a mask and a brown bag to put the mask in for the day. And so these new concepts we all had to grapple with and accept very quickly. So from that aspect, things changed quite a bit. We went from inpatient clinic, so I do a pulmonary clinic outpatient. We went from outpatient clinic to telehealth. Telehealth is the worst. Like, I have to talk to my patient over the video. Like, that's awful. But we still had to get patients seen, but in a safe way. So lots of changes from a professional standpoint. And then personally, I became a potential risk factor for everyone in my family, in my household and extended family. So I literally, went to myself. I had a whole regimen of what to do when I came home before I could interact with my family. I didn't see, my extended family for a very long time. I haven't seen my family that lives on the South Side for a year and a half now. So it impacted all aspects of my life for sure. So, as it has many people, probably all of us in some way or another. So along those lines, Farran, how has the pandemic impacted your life or that of people that you care about?
So obviously it has impacted my school life, going from what I thought would be 2 weeks to a whole year and some months. But it's been like bittersweet. So my junior year, I didn't get to take my SAT, so I had to like really pack everything into my senior year. But the pro side to that, colleges became test optional, so they began to look at the person versus all of the numbers, and so they began to look at like your personal essay versus your grades compared to those last 2-ish years. So also, I felt like I was falling behind in class because they had to like really go over, is this important or is this mandatory for the students to know? So now I feel like I have to go to YouTube and see, hey, did I miss this, or did the teacher really teach this, or were they just running through it? And also, people around me, they lost jobs. So to the financial aspect, I really had to cut down and really pay attention to what I was spending or what I was doing. So I guess that can go to like a bittersweet thing also, because I'm about to go to college. So a budgeting aspect to that. And also social anxiety. Everything is 6 feet. So I really didn't want anybody to be close to me, but I didn't want anybody to be away from me. So I was feeling lonely, but iffy, because I didn't want COVID or I didn't want to get sick. So I'm like, hey, maybe I should wash my hands more. And once I started washing my hands more and paying attention to what I was doing, it became more so still a bit an anxiety thing, but I adapted better to it.
Absolutely. I
So
think we're all going to learn the impact of COVID and this whole social distancing thing. Mental health is significant. The importance of socialization. We are social beings, and so we're going to feel this impact long to come, I think, as you've pointed out.
yeah. So now that we're in school, well, kind of in school and part online, I get to see my classmates and I don't feel as lonely as I used to. And I think well, it's review week for seniors, so I think I can ask the teachers the more on spot questions versus online having to fight to get my answer out with the 45 minutes we have for class.
Yep. Yep. It's important.
So, yes, because of safety restrictions, many patients were not able to see their families or loved ones during their time that while they were there. Did you find yourself having to treat more than the physical health of your patients?
So yes, to answer your question simply. So I want to again credit my Jesuit education to understanding that there is always more to the sick than just their physical. And so, Loyola's, the medical school's motto at that time is, we also treat the human spirit. And so with that background, coming into this pandemic, you are faced with the complications of social distancing, the complications of the need to isolate patients. We at very early on in the pandemic had a no visitor policy at all. So if you found yourself in the hospital with COVID or not, no one could come and visit you. So imagine just that. You're suffering from whatever illness that has landed you in the hospital with no one to serve as a support for you. And then in the ICU, where we often deal with life and death questions and decisions, there was no family at the bedside. There was no family to hold the hands of these patients who, were struggling to breathe or struggling to wake up after weeks of being on a ventilator and not knowing what happened to them. So it was a very challenging experience, and it still remains a challenging experience. We had to have conversations about, how, like, we actually have protocols about how to identify the people that we need to talk to on a daily basis for our patients. And we bought a lot of iPads and a lot of FaceTiming just to have some type of interaction with the patients and their family. As providers, we didn't stay in the room very long. Like, we couldn't hold their hand. We couldn't talk them through it because we were sorting out this idea of like minimizing our exposure. So it was a horrible, horrible experience that I think that we got through the best way that we could. And I will share two stories, one a good story and one a not so great story. I'll start with the not so great so we can end on a good note. We had a almost 100-year-old gentleman who was Spanish speaking come in with COVID, and he had multiple family members who had COVID as well. There were several family members admitted to either our hospital, but on the floor, or other hospitals. So that minimized the family that was available. He was what we call do not resuscitate. And so he had decided before COVID that if he needed like the ventilator or things like that, he didn't want it. And the things that we did have that were not invasive, like masks and things like that, this 90-something, almost 100-year-old gentleman by himself, not speaking the language, did not want to tolerate this mask. And so we found ourselves in a position where he just wanted to go home. That's what he kept saying. I just want to go home. I don't want to be here. I just want to go home. And so we ultimately made the decision that we wouldn't do much else. He wanted the mask off, which means we couldn't provide him with the oxygen that he needed. And we were able to transition him somewhere where he could be comfortable and his family could be with him in his last days. And so that was very hard for us. And then the more positive story is a gentleman who had come in and he had been on the ventilator for about 2 weeks and he was getting better. But the only thing that was preventing him from like fully coming off the ventilator was this kind of agitation. So we finally were able to get him off the ventilator. And the nurses told us that the first thing he wanted to do once he was extubated or had the ventilator removed was talk to his wife. And they said on the phone, he just sat there and cried. He didn't know what happened to him for 2 weeks. She wasn't there. She didn't know really what was going on with him either. And they just both cried on the phone. So it shows you the additional tax, not just the physical aspects of COVID, that patients as well as healthcare providers really had to tackle and continue to tackle during this pandemic.
So, how did you take care of yourself during this time while you were putting yourself last, while taking care of your patients and your family? How did you actually take care of yourself spiritually or mentally, maybe even physically?
So, what I will be completely honest about is that I didn't do the best job of it. In the middle of a pandemic, and for me, you don't think about yourself. You think about everybody else. How do I protect my family? How do I take care of my patients? Go, go, go. I was literally in the ICU every 2 weeks, which is a lot of ICU time, a lot of patients. And so I found myself in this, just go, go, go. I sometimes commented that it felt like Groundhog Day. Every day was kind of the same. Like, you get up, you go to work, you take care of COVID patients, you come home and shower and go to sleep to do it again. But now that things are settling down, I have been very intentional about taking care of myself more. Like, I went and got my hair colored. I hadn't had my hair colored in a year and a half. Like, It was really crazy looking before that. I recently got my, went and did a little spa day. And so I'm doing things of that nature. And then I find myself really having to be willing to be honest with people that I trust about the emotions that I have dealt with and continue to deal with from the pandemic. We, as people in general, and particularly frontline workers who saw the worst of the worst, are really going to have to be honest with ourselves and start talking about the impact that this pandemic and what we've seen has had on us, and really be open to working through that so that we will be okay.
So on the other side of that, during the pandemic, I think I cut my hair probably like 3 times, changed the color maybe 5 times, but I was at home, so I really didn't, get in trouble for it. Um, but it has been reported that the COVID pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on the community of color. Did you witness this both through your work or in our community? And why is there a disproportionate effect?
So I think it is important to remember that COVID in and of itself did not attack various communities in disparate rates. That's not what happened. What happened, and what continues to happen, is that we have a healthcare system that is set up that includes structural policies that lead to health disparities. Okay. There has been identified health disparities in the medical community since the early 1900s, in which W.E.B. Du Bois put out a report. I think it was like 1908. That's how long we've been dealing with health disparities. That said, the mortality that we're seeing amongst African Americans, I think he called them Negro in that report, is not due to anything biologic. It's due to their social constructs. Okay.
Mhm.
That's first report of health disparities. And then we continue to have the evidence that there are health disparities, access to care, access to jobs that have access to care, where the hospital's located, the hospitals that are in those more marginalized and minoritized communities, what resources do they have, right? I have family in Roseland. They live literally 2 blocks from a hospital, right? They want no parts of Roseland because of the lack of resources that particular hospital has. I'll share 2 stories, COVID related, that kind of gets to the heart of how disparities impacts these communities. So the first story is kind of towards the beginning of the pandemic. My aunt had some potentially COVID-y symptoms, and I wanted her to go to the hospital. And she was like, absolutely not. I'm not going to Roseland. And the nearest hospital was, I think, Trinity, and she didn't want to drive that 30 minutes. Okay. So imagine being sick with COVID. I don't know if she had COVID. Thankfully, my aunt is fine. But imagine being sick with COVID and having to face the decision. Do you go to the community hospital that lacks resources and other things that we won't talk about right now to get treated? Or do you take that 30-minute drive, not being able to breathe, having severe symptoms, to the next nearest hospital that you feel more confident in? That's a structural problem. That's a system problem, right? And then when you think about, and then the other story, it'll involve the Roseland community as well, is that when testing finally became more mainstream, Roseland community did not get testing, of the easily available testing, until May or June in the pandemic, right? And so when they finally got the testing, literally cars were lined up 8 blocks around for people to go in and get tested for COVID. I'm saying May or June. We had been in it for months, and this community did not have access to testing that other communities had access to. That is a structural problem that leads to disparities and the persistence of disparities. Okay. In addition to that, when you think about who are the people who were more susceptible to getting COVID. It's the people who are the essential workers. It's the people who could not afford to take off work. It was the people who are forward facing from a public standpoint. It is the people who did not have access to being able to quote unquote work from home, right? One of my colleagues, Dr. Clyde Yancey, wrote an editorial, and in it he said that, basically staying from home is working from home is a privilege that we don't really conceptualize. And those people tend to be in minoritized and marginalized people. If you look at the CDC guidelines of like what to do when you have COVID or you suspect you have COVID, it's isolate. Well, who can isolate if they only have 2 bedrooms for 5 people? How do you manage that isolation, right? If you're sick and they want you to stay at home, but you're the breadwinner of your family and you don't have sick leave, how does that work for your family? And so those are the things that are in place that really were exposed by COVID that we really do have to continue to grapple with, or the next pandemic, and there will be another, we're going to see the same things because it's a structural and a systems issue that we haven't dealt with. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, I know, but we're seeing it from a vaccination standpoint as well. There are systems in place that we really have to deal with so that we can close this disparity gap that has been so persistent in our US healthcare system for so very long. So with that very long answer, I think that, the pandemic has definitely made us once again look at how our systems work and really fight to change them at this point.
So, COVID has put like a spotlight on the issue, well, the medical issues and systematic issues on certain communities, well, communities of color or the African American communities, along with other institutions. So, over 32% of the US population has been fully vaccinated, and over 44 has at least received 1 shot. And the news we have heard that the African American community have concerns about the safety of the vaccines. Why is that, and how can we address these concerns?
So again, there are a lot of different factors. Some of it, as we just talked about, are some disparities issues, right? But a lot of it that we only want to hint at is the distrust that certain communities carry for the the healthcare system. And it's a mistrust that is rooted in history. It's a mistrust that is, if you think about the person who is the father of OBGYN, how he treated African-American women and did procedures on them with no type of anesthesia for the sake of science, okay? If you think about the Tuskegee experiment and how they allowed syphilis to continue in these gentlemen to figure out the natural course of syphilis when they knew that a treatment was available, that's a mark on our history, right? When you think about the coerced sterilization of minority women to try to control the population, the minority population, that's history, okay? And then that's a history that continues to carry over. And then we'll throw in this idea, and there's more and more research coming out about it, this idea of implicit bias, okay? And how implicit bias impacts how we care for our patients. That is a fact. That has been proven over and over again. There are lots of studies that show that African-American people are offered less pain medicine than others. There are studies to show that, if you're African-American and you present with the same stage cancer as someone who is not African-American, the recommendations are completely different. That is, you cannot wrap your head around it, but it is something that exists, and it is due to our own biases that we carry and that we don't do a good job of checking to make sure they don't impact care. And we as a medical community can pretend like it doesn't impact care, but it does. And so it is that history, that experience, right, with the medical community that makes people who have not been, such good recipients of such good, trustworthy care, makes them very hesitant when you start to talk about new vaccines, right? And then we lack, in my opinion, the appropriate education about the vaccine. We did not say, you know what, this is not new. Like, this has been around for a very long time. We lack the idea, the education of why this vaccine was able to, the money behind it, because we were in the middle of the pandemic. We lack the education of saying, you know what, Moderna is offered in minority communities because those communities don't have the -80 freezer that's needed for Pfizer. And so you leave that lack of education and people fill it in. Oh, there's something in Moderna, they're going to put chips in us. And so we failed to properly educate a group or groups of people that have historically not benefited from the medical system. And we put the ownership on them. And that just doesn't work. You have people that don't trust the system and you don't educate, you're going to get continued mistrust. And so what I was saying early on to people in conversation is, you have to stop asking people to trust the system. They're not. That's something that happens over time. That's something to see the system change. But you have to educate them so that they understand the safety and the importance of the vaccine. And we still haven't nailed that. That's how I'll leave that. We still have room to go with that.
Also, I think along with that, the social media also played a huge part in that, because I'm a teenager myself and I had nothing but online and screens thrown in my face. So I had nothing but basically free time. And I think it was the way words were framed. So they'll use like a word like big instead of, well, you like a synonym. They don't really go with the situation, but they'll use big versus humongous. It bring out different thought patterns. I will pick a humongous pizza over a big pizza because I would think that is more versus just a big pizza. So, how do you think this pandemic will affect teenagers in the future?
Absolutely. So I by no means am an expert on adolescent anything. I have uh, expertise in being the aunt of a 16-year-old who's a sophomore in high school. So I'll speak from that expertise. And I worry. I think that we all worry, as you pointed out earlier. Like, did our kids lose a little bit of education, right? There's difference between having that one-on-one interaction in the Zoom. And so we have to sort out, like, where are our kids after all of this? There's the social aspect to this. Like, my nephew has stayed in his room for a year and a half for the most part. Like, my sister calls him down and he'll come and sit with us for a little bit and he goes back up to his room. Like, we're social beings. It's not healthy, right? And I'm not saying he's not interacting with his friends. It's on Zoom, it's on whatever video game, whatever they're playing. And so I worry how that will impact relationships and things going on. The good thing is it was a year and a half. And so it was a short amount of time out of hopefully a very extended life period. And so hopefully, we will be able to make up for this year and a half. I don't want to call it a lost year, but it was a year of challenges that we're going to have to really assess the impact of, and then make changes to where we need to. So in that regard, Farran, what about your future? You're off to college soon. Where have you been accepted, and have you made a decision about where you're going to go?
Yes, I've made a decision where I will be attending in the fall. So the colleges that I've been accepted into is Loyola, Marquette, Hampton, Michigan State, Howard, NIU, St. Xavier, Bradley, Samford, and a small school. It's called Durixdale. But in the fall, I will be attending Bradley University on a full ride scholarship. So yay!
Yay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Where is Howard in that list? I'm a HBCU alumna, so I'm a little bit biased.
Howard is in there. I plan on visiting and showing my face on campus. So I plan on
Oh,
going.
okay, show your face. I see you. If that ever gets to be, if you really are strongly looking at Howard, my niece, god niece, I'll say, is actually at Howard, so I could definitely make that connection for you as well. But
Well,
I'm so excited. That's awesome. Congratulations. All your hard work has paid off.
thank you very much. Um,
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure there is plenty more work to go. So, whew, I'm
Always, always.
mentally prepare myself for that right now. But of course, I have to celebrate my moments right now.
Celebrate the moments and keep going. I think, obviously, I believe that you, have been in the institution that has given you the foundation to definitely succeed in this next journey. So,
Thank you. We have time for one last question. Many people still have concerns about the safety. As restrictions are lifted, we want to go back to life pre-COVID. What do you recommend us to keep doing or keep in mind for our next chapter during COVID?
you just open a Pandora's box for me, because I don't think that there's a pre-COVID life. I think there's a post-COVID life. And this idea of getting back to pre-COVID scares me, because obviously some of the things that we were doing in pre-COVID didn't work, which is why COVID happened. And so hopefully we have learned from this whole pandemic, and we can create another existence that shows the things that we've learned, right? The thing that I think is amazing, and people talk about it here and there, is we didn't see flu this year. I did not take care of one single patient personally. I'm not saying one didn't exist, but I didn't take care of one single patient with flu. As opposed to the year before the pandemic, I entered the ICU. There were 20 patients on a ventilator from flu. That's a huge thing, right? And we need to learn from that and say, why is it that we didn't see flu? It's because we ramped up our hand washing. It's because we were wearing masks. It's because we were social distancing. So is that a bad thing to prevent so many deaths that we have annually from the flu? I don't think so, right? I don't think I will ever see a patient in clinic without a mask anymore, right? I don't think I'll ever go, you know, outside during flu season without a mask anymore. I think that there are certain things that we've learned, and hopefully we've learned from this pandemic, that we can carry over. I do believe, and I think that we're close, that there needs to be, we need to reopen, and we need to get back to doing the things that, make us unique in who we are. I think that we have to apply what we've learned to do that in a more, in a safer manner. And so this idea of getting back to pre-COVID life, I think, is something that we shouldn't strive for. I think we should strive for, a new existence that takes into account the things that we have learned through this pandemic. I truly believe that we experience things because because we need to learn from them. And so it'll really be interesting to figure out what we learned from this pandemic. But for now, until we have herd immunity, until the majority of the population is vaccinated, we have to continue to do the things we know work, and that's masking, and that's social distancing, and that's potentially following the CDC guidelines. No, we should follow the CDC guidelines. And so, we're almost there. It's really important not to go too quickly. But there is light that we actually see now at the end of the tunnel. And so, these are exciting times for us, but I think we do need to make sure that we apply the things that we have learned.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I was very honored to have this interview, ask you questions, Thank you for taking time out of your day to sit and talk with me. So,
Same here,
thank you.
Farran. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I hope to see you soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Farran and Dr. Gates, and thank you for joining us. I hope our time together inspired you to learn more about Christ the King. Get involved, hire our students, or support the school financially. As Clem mentioned, we rely on the funds earned by our students in their corporate work-study program jobs. While our lives are getting closer to their pre-pandemic norm, the loss of revenue from our corporate work-study program will continue to affect CTK into the upcoming school year. If you would like to learn more about getting involved or make a gift to support our students, please call the school and ask for me or go to our website. If you would like to learn more about hiring a team of students, please contact Dalia Rocatello, Vice President of the Corporate Work Study Program. Thanks again to our guest speakers, our generous sponsors, and thank you. Have a great afternoon.